I'm Muna, and today we are from Integrate UK, and Integrate is a charity that gives young people a platform and empowers young people to talk about racial and gender inequality.
We're in collaboration with UK Youth, so our podcast is Between the Intersections, and we have a special guest called Nas.
So my name is Nasra Ayub, and I'm a campaigner, activist and writer on issues such as racial injustices, gender-based violence, and also I aim to empower youth through that work. I also work at Global Fund for Children, which is a global charity that funds children's work across the world. And one of the things that I'm passionate about, which I guess we'll dive deep into, is the topic of mental health and young black people.
And I just want to ask, how do you feel about young black people's mental health?
Yeah, so I think for me, in terms of young black people's mental health, I think it's a very underfunded, noticed issue, in the sense that there's a lot of disparity between how, I guess, other young people and young black people experience mental health and the support that they get and how that is perceived. A lot of young black people, especially in this country, face, the same sort of barriers that young people face altogether, such as the cost of living crisis, education and poverty and all those other things. But I think there's another layer added to it, which is the issue of race and racism, which also causes trauma, causes further barriers and distress for a lot of young black people in this country and also across the world. So I think that the issue of young black people's mental health is something that needs to be discussed more, but also have a different approach to, I guess, if we look at young people's mental health across the board.
And is there anything in particular that you've seen you've encountered or experienced yourself in your line of work?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things is that I think a lot of, especially again in this country, I think a lot of young black people feel gaslit.
Yeah.
Because when they talk about their experiences of racism, a lot of the times it may not be as overt as we see maybe in the US or in other kind of contextual examples. But actually, when we look at the UK, it's kind of like microaggressions, the way that they're treated, or kind of second guessing yourself when you're in spaces that are predominantly white, and the way that you're spoken to in terms of tones or
more like passive aggressive.
Yeah, passive aggressiveness, right? This country loves passive aggressiveness, and I think we can all speak to that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the issue in regards to, I guess, young black people's, again, mental health.
Yeah.
And we see that, again, in the media as well, how the media always gaslits black people in general, in the sense that they make it seem like when we talk about racism and race, that we're exaggerating, or we've taken it the wrong way, or that it's not as bad as we, assume it to be. So I think that's the same kind of examples that I've seen with young black people and when they come forward. And just to kind of further go on that, when I used to work at university as a student officer, a lot of black students used to come to me and tell me about the racism they experienced. And one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of it, again, was things such as the differential treatment from their lecturers, or kind of not being supported, or trying to go to the counselling services and being told that your problem is ferment kind of thing, not get
just
over it,
but just take it
on the chin. And that's what, a lot of, again, black people are told anyway, firm everything that you're going through. And I think that's a really kind of consistent example that we see with young black people. And I've experienced it myself as well. So, I can speak to it.
Do you think mental health, services are, white-centric?
Absolutely, and again, I can even get personal with it. I feel like let's go back to when I went to university. One of the things that, a lot of us black people were asking for, black students, were, our diverse counselling services, because, I would go to the counselling service and they'll give me a white therapist, and, shout out to the white therapist, nothing wrong with them. But for me, it's, it's my issue was that I needed someone to understand me and where I was coming from, because when you're in a university space and you feel like you have imposter syndrome, and you feel like, the way that other kids are performing, you're not performing the same as them, and you feel othered, it's difficult to try and, explain that to somebody that might not have gone through it themselves.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was sat in a therapist's chair and I was trying to say to them, I can't do my essay because I'm the only black person in my lecture hall, or like, I can't do my essay because I'm struggling and I can't function. Like, I can't function, and I hate being here, and I'm anxious and all this kind of stuff. How's she going to relate to that?
Yeah, how could she even respond at the same time?
And she didn't, you know. She was just like, I understand. Yeah, I get it. It's hard. And I said, so what am I here for? Like, you know, someone across the street could tell me that. And I think that's my issue, is that when I did find a black therapist, I felt seen, I felt heard, you know. I didn't have to go into further details of my trauma to make her understand. Rather, it was for me to speak about, for her to kind of, you know, get to a point where like I can unpack that trauma rather than having to explain that trauma. There's two different parts of that, and I think that's the issue. And when you add culture to it, and you know, things at home, or like, you know, being a Muslim and all these different things, you have to explain all those things, and I think it's quite difficult. What do you guys think about that? Do you feel like it's something that you agree with? Is it similar with you?
Yeah, I definitely agree. On top of also being black, we're also young black Muslim women, and at the same time, even though we're still black, we're also Muslim women. So it's kind of like we're the bottom of the barrel type of thing. And there's a lot of things that even like, so much so white therapists will not relate to us, but even though like a black therapist even won't relate to us on the religion aspect of things. So I think it is difficult, and I have had a rough time like going to the GP and you know, trying to get a referral, and just it was hectic, but like at the end of the day, they're only going to tell you one thing, and that's firm.
And that's the thing. I think that's the bigger thing, is that I think what you're speaking to is medical racism, and the medical racism that, you know, black people are faced with. And I think one of the biggest examples is the mortality rate of black women giving birth, and how, you know, that's not happening because of, you know, something that's outside of the control of people, but it's because of the negligence of the NHS and medical racism. And I think that further speaks to, I guess, how young people are treated, young black people, when they go to, you know, medical professionals, and are kind of told that, what you're saying isn't like, you're exaggerating, or, you know, especially when it comes to pain, right?
Yeah, it's something that you can deal with type of thing.
Yeah. So I think this is the thing with racism and the experiences that black people are faced with, is that it goes into every aspect of society.
And are there any proposed ideas for combating this? So like, not trying to get rid of it fully, but obviously tackling this issue.
Yeah, 100%. I think the first thing that we all need to do, and I say we, I mean, I guess the government, the you know, society in general, is admit that this is an issue. You know, I think that's the first thing. If we think about, you know, has the government ever actually addressed the disparities in different groups and mental health? First of all, have they even addressed like young people's mental health in general? And you know, we see a lot of cuts that are being made to funding services that are for young people and mental health services. So again, another thing that needs to happen is that there needs to be more funding that goes towards that, but also more funding for black therapists, black health professionals, and support for them to not just get in but get on in those spaces, so that they are able to support other black people that are coming to them, especially young black people. And I think that's what it comes to, is that there's been so much taken away from young black people in terms of community, in terms of like, you know, the cost of living crisis, all of these different things. And I think what needs to happen in terms of one type of solution would be to fund that, give that space to that, you know. And secondly, I think one of the other things that I think I'm very strongly about is that mental health, we see it very generically, I believe. And we see it as, like, if someone's going through a mental health crisis or whatever, just talk to them, talk to your friends. You know, if someone
take a walk, like go do something.
If someone unalives themselves, especially someone that's like a prominent figure, then you see everyone putting on their statuses, guys, talk to your friends. People don't talk to each other. Support your friends. But mental health and the reality of mental health goes beyond that. You know, it's not a consistent kind of thing where you talk to your friends and then everyone's better. No. Depression and anxiety and all these different things can be a lifelong battle, right? And I think that's the other thing, is that we need more kind of knowledge and education around how do you support other people that are going through mental health issues, and how do you support young black people that are going through these issues, because then comes culture into it as well, like, you know, especially like if you think about like the Somali culture. I don't think we're the best at handling mental health, you know, especially back home. We see that people are getting locked up and chained and all these different things for having mental health issues and being seen as crazy, right?
Yeah, and the stigma around Somali women, like having to, obviously the translation is tie your waist together, like like just, you know, get up and get on with it.
Right,
I don't think it's right, and I think they do need to address the situation within the community.
Exactly, and I think that's such an important point because, you know, where does that come from? You know, where does that idea of resilience come from? If we look at history, what did all of our, you know, ancestors go through? Colonialism, slavery, you know, trying to move to a different country. So what did they have to do? They had to firm it. They had to, you know, tie their waist and get themselves together. And that's kind of why they're telling us to do the same thing, because that's all they've ever known, and they feel like they're okay.
It's a cycle, it's a vicious cycle.
Right? Yeah. But we know that a lot of our parents and grandparents have PTSD and trauma from war and all these different things that was inflicted by the West. So I think that's the thing, is that this is a multifaceted, complex issue, and there needs to be multiple solutions to it. But I think one of the things is education, open-mindedness around what are the issues that young black people are going through.
Yeah, and also, sorry, just to go back to the therapy, why do you think there's an overrepresentation of white therapists?
Because trying to get into therapy is hard, you know. Trying to get into therapy is not like a easy, like, career route process kind of thing. I'm not saying being a medical professional is an easy career route process either, but in terms of, you see that, okay, cool, you go to university, you do medicine, and then you go into the NHS kind of thing. Whereas with therapy and kind of wanting to become a psychologist or a therapist, it's very much more difficult. And you need to have connections, you need to have money, you need to have certain things that you need to do, like courses that you need to pay for in order to become that. And again, who's going to be able to pay for that? It's going to be those that are more privileged in society, which tends to be white people. So if that's the case, then where do black people end up not going into those professions? So I think that is a massive, massive reason for it, because people don't know, how do you become a therapist and so forth. And also, I think a lot of, you know, the black community are just tired and broken and traumatized constantly. And it's hard to even, like, you know, think about, how can I support other people in a job, full-time job, and go through that whilst I'm also trying to deal with the trauma that has been inflicted on me in the same breath.
What do you want white people to take from this discussion?
That things are bad. I think, to be serious, I think one of the things that is, first of all, that, like, white privilege is a real thing. Operating in a white society and a white supremacist society is a real thing, and it's something that impacts everybody that is black. Whether you know, there might be some individuals that may not be impacted by it. So I think the thing that I would want them to take away from that is that, you know, that privilege exists. And the second thing is that, you know, you can be an ally, but allyship doesn't also look like feeling sorry for black people or unwarrantedly coming to speak to them about race, etc. Because in that space, you can also re-traumatize black people when they're just chilling, you know, when they're just existing. Literally. I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but for me, there's been so many times I've been to events and then, like, somebody will come up to me that's, like, you know, white, and they'll come and talk to me about race. And I'm thinking,
like,
hold on.
It's not really your place at the end of the day.
Yeah, like, just because I'm black doesn't mean that, you know, and we're in a space where, you know, it's a, I don't know, a charity space or whatever.
Like an awareness kind of
you
thing.
It doesn't mean that you can come and talk to me and just start telling me about the fact that you understand that you have white privilege, all that kind of stuff. You know, and they're like, like, I understand, you know what?
But there's understanding something and doing something about it.
100%. And that's the thing, you coming to talk to me is you absolving yourself of that guilt and making you be like, I'm not like those people. But it's like,
I cannot
validate
for you.
You. Now I have to, like, what's so cool? Now I have to take care of you and make you feel better about the fact that you came and told me that. Like, no. And I think I had to learn that over the years, being an activist and campaigner. So many times they'll come up to me and then it'll flip the script. Where I start feeling guilty and I start feeling bad for you telling me that you're white and that you have white privilege, and I'm like, what the hell? So I think, please, let's leave that space alone and stop doing that type of thing, because young black people don't need to kind of take on that burden of whatever you feel.
Do you think that institutional, like, racism plays a factor into, like, the mental health services?
Yes, absolutely. As we know that the mental health services are, again, as we said earlier, highly overrepresented by white therapists, and this isn't just a thing by chance kind of thing. You know, there's a whole institutional issue here where there's a lack of access for black and brown therapists to get into that space, but also then, you know, if you have a system that's overly represented by white therapists, then when black people try and access that space, then they sometimes can be faced with racism and microaggressions and a lack of understanding, which then further feeds this whole idea of institutional racism. So I think it massively, massively impacts the mental health services, and I think there's just a lack of space and a lack of kind of consideration for the impact that has on young black people and their mental health, because where do you go to for help, you know? And when you're in a space such as school or university, etc., and your white peers are being able to, you know, think through their feelings and have support, you're not having the same. And we also know that, you know, white students are more likely to get a 2-1 or higher in university compared to their black counterparts. Now, that isn't just a case of just intelligence, but that goes into institutional racism and the racist kind of experiences that black students have. And then that's further fueled by the fact that they don't have support services that reflect them and speak to them and their experiences.
And is there like a certain experience of yours that you've experienced that you don't mind sharing, where you felt like that your mental health was disregarded by a peer, by students, by teachers? It could be at uni, secondary school, it could be at any time period of your life where you feel like that you're able to share.
Yeah, I think for me it was when I went to go see a therapist, and I was really, really struggling. And the reason why I was struggling was because, again, as I said, I didn't feel like I fit into university. I am somebody who's working class, come from poverty. Not that that's a good thing. So going into a university where predominantly students are coming from private school, it's the third highest for students coming from private schools. It was hard to integrate, and that lack of... And the thing is, I shouldn't have to have integrated, do you know what I'm trying to say? Because what I'm integrating into is a middle-class white space, which I'm not a part of. And having struggled with that, I took that to a therapist, a white therapist. And again, I said to her, like, how I had all these different essays to do, and I was like, I am struggling, like, I can't do this, I can't cope. And she was like, you're just going to have to get on with it. Like, there was no unpacking that trauma. We had 50 minutes in it. We could have been there for a long time. But, like, there was she didn't speak to that. And I think that was a struggle. Now, one thing I do want to say on that is that just because we have black therapists in that space as well doesn't mean that that's going to solve the issue of being understood. Because, again, there's been a time where I've had a black therapist and, like, that just didn't work out.
They relay the same message,
No, she just didn't care, to be honest. We were running on vibes, like, do you know what I'm trying to say? Our therapy session would have to be like 50 minutes, right? I was there for like 20 minutes each time. So I think what is the issue, I think now that I'm thinking about it, is a lack of option. I think for, again, the lack of option, also how expensive it is if you can't access public funded therapy. So, I think just going back to the question of when there was a time that I felt disregarded by mental health services, I think both those times, you know, one of them was the issue of not feeling heard and seen, and the other one was that it didn't match, but because I had to take what I got, because A, I was poor and I couldn't afford a private therapist, and B, I was just like excited to have a black therapist. So I was like, I can't let this go because I'm in a place of privilege, because this is rare, especially 4 or 5 years ago. So for me, it was a case where I just had to firm it, and I think that's not something that is, new to anyone, or something that other young black people have experienced themselves.
Do you think that, like, the socioeconomic backgrounds of black people and, like you just said, like, middle-class spaces and everything, do you think that kind of, like, caters into the idea of, like, them being disregarded?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If we look at, again, black women, for example, black women are not allowed to be emotional. Black women are not allowed to cry, have a wobble.
We learned that the hard way. Even through media.
And I think this goes back to one of the things that I wrote about as well, like, in the sense that young black kids are not even allowed to be children. And what I mean by that is that when I was at the June 2020 protest in regards to Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd situation, I was sat on the grass, and obviously everyone was making speeches, do you know what I'm trying to say, coming together. And then a young, like, I would say about 9 years old, a young black girl went on the mic. She went on the mic and she was talking her talk, do you know what I'm trying to say? And everyone was cheering her on. Obviously they would, because that's what community is. But when I started kind of thinking more about it, then she started crying, right? She started crying on the mic because she was speaking so passionately. And I just thought to myself, I was like, hold on, this isn't as, like, cute and lit and like empowering as we think it to be,
and as it should be, because
right?
that's a child.
Yeah. And I just started thinking to myself, and I was having a conversation with my friend that was next to me, and I was like, hold on, this girl shouldn't be up there. This girl should not be out there. No child should be at a protest, but because they have to fight for the fact that they're black. You know, how is it a 9-year-old has to know about those things when their white counterparts do not? Yeah. They can go to school and not have to worry about, are they going to be treated differently? Are they going to be stigmatized or have racism happen to them because of the color of their skin? And I think it all goes back to that kind of thing, is that, young black people have been traumatized from an early age. Yeah. If we think about the first times that we've experienced racism, a lot of us could say like 6 years old, 7 years old, 5 years old, when we knew how to, speak, or how we knew how to kind of process things. And it's a vivid memory for a lot of people, including myself. So I think it goes back to that like, young black people are not allowed to kind of, especially just black women in general, black girls in general, are not allowed to be upset, they're not allowed to be sad, they're not allowed to kind of be emotional without being labelled aggressive. Yeah. And that goes into the mental health services and goes into any institutions, because it just leads to black women being disregarded all the time. Yeah. And just the last point on that, I just want to say is that I think even as you get older, when you're in a workspace, you take that burden on with you, where you try and not show emotion, and you try and not show anger or frustration or any of those things, because it's going to be weaponized against you. And we've seen that time and time again.
Do you think the Mental Health Act, like the whole, like, they're being like detained, and like young black people are like 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act than white people? Do you think that like all of this, like you just said, like racism at a young age and traumatized like experiences, do you think that kind of like impacts that?
100%. We know that there's a terrible relationship between certain services, including the police, and black people and the black community, and that isn't coming from a place of irrationality. That's not coming from a place of somewhere where it's just it doesn't make sense. That's coming from a place where black people have had violence inflicted on them continuously by these institutions that are meant to protect them. And I think the fact that black people are more likely to be detained doesn't come from a place where black people have worse mental health, and that's the reasoning for it, even though that might be the case due to societal factors. But that comes from a place of how do we see young black people in distress, right? Yeah. We see them in ways of violence, and we see them in being a threat rather than this person needs help. There's been times in even the UK and in the US where police have been called on young black people and just black people in general in distress, and it leads to death. Because they're not dealing with them properly, and they're dealing with them with violence and restraint, and seeing them as something that can be discarded, rather than actually these people need help. And I think that's what it goes down to. These systems don't work, and we know that because they're all kind of built on white supremacy and racism. So who is going to be attacked? Who's going to be kind of given the worst part of it? And it's going to be those that are minorities, such as black people and the black community. So yeah, there needs to be a massive overhaul of these systems. The question of what that looks like is a long-ass conversation. I mean, a long conversation, let me not swear. But I think one of the things that we know is that policing and detaining of young black people is wrong, and it doesn't work, and it's underpinned by racism and the view that black people are not seen as humans.
And I don't know if you remember the case from about 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago, about the girl who was at school and they were checking her pad for drugs. Oh yeah. And it really affected her mental health. Do you know?
I know about Child Q. I don't know about the.
I think it is Child.
No, Child Q was checked for. She was made to be stripped. I think.
Yeah. I think it is that.
Yeah,
one.
and they like checked her underwear and everything. Yeah.
Is that the same case?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
And it was in school.
Yes.
And,
yeah.
And it really affected her mental health, and there was the whole protest about it. Mm-hmm. And how do you think that the authorities should have responded to that?
Well,
regarding regarding kids' mental health, and how should they? And also, she was black also, and how should they respond to the mental health aspect of things and the law that goes along with
I think one thing we need to understand is that is a child.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't see children as criminals, and we shouldn't see children and treat them as criminals. And again, too often we see black young kids being treated as criminals rather than actually this is a safeguarding issue, right? And I think the proper way to have treated that issue is as a safeguarding issue and protect the child, you know?
Yeah.
And not, treat them as inhumane and make them strip. And check their pad for drugs. I think that's vile, and I think that's disgusting. And I think it just again is another example of the way that these services view black children, and that is something that they feel like they need to protect rather as criminals.
Yeah, and along with the protests, they were saying like it was very aggressive and that they shouldn't be doing these type of things. And I think that's wrong, and people should be able to speak their mind, and they should be able to protest against something that was disgusting. And for the government or for anybody to say that that's like, that's ghetto or that's like, that's ratchet, I think that's disgusting. And yeah, let's basically just agree with what you've said.
No,
with like the Black Lives Matter movement, do you think that it was only like a narrow focus on like just like straight black men, and like rather than the actual emotional toll on like young children, just police brutality and like systemic racism?
Let's talk on it, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think it had good intentions of where it was trying to go. But I think this is the issue with movements, and not the issue with movements, but the issue of kind of homogenizing movements and making them into one. And making a group into one, because the black community is a very homogenous community. And I think there were a lot of differential opinions in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement and how things should be done or addressed. And that kind of fragmentation between those different opinions made it seem like that the movement wasn't working, or the movement is terrible or whatnot. But I think there needed to be an understanding that there was more to the movement than that. I think that's number one. I think number two, I think there was a heavy focus on straight black men, because the movement was around for a while, but I think it erupted because of the George Floyd incident, right? So I think that's why, and there were many cases coming out where it became high profile of black straight men being brutalized by the police and murdered by the police. Whereas when it came to young children or black women,
Abdi.
And the way that she was treated as well, in terms of not only the case in itself, but also after, and the way that the police treated that case. None of that was kind of talked about, right? Or it was talked about, but it wasn't taken seriously. There wasn't a spotlight on it as heavily.
And I think that's mainly because when everybody showed up to the George Floyd protest, they were like, we should stand up for what's right. And then when it comes down to a young Somali girl, that is not, they kind of don't, other black people don't see it as their kind of fight. Because when I went to the protest, I was seeing a theme of just Somali people as well. And on the mic, they were like, all black lives should matter. You shouldn't pick and choose what black lives matter. And I think I think some black people, obviously not all black people are like this, but some black people do think that if that's not their people, which is why I do think Somali people are excluded sometimes, that's not their people. They shouldn't be fighting for their rights. And I think that you shouldn't pick and choose what black lives matter. All black lives matter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
100%. I think it's a very complex issue. And the reason why I say that is I absolutely agree. I think when it comes to the Shukri Abdi case, there was a lack of kind of response for a while from, I guess, the black community. I think it was a Somali community kind of
issue. Yeah.
They're them fighting the fight, and obviously it's frustrating because we're all black, But I think there's a bigger issue here, because I think firstly and historically, the black community and black movements have always benefited other communities too. So I think it's a very difficult kind of conversation when we talk about some black people not fighting for other black people's rights, etc. When the black civil rights movement, for example, benefits all kind of races. However, having said that, I think especially in regards to the Shukri Abdi case, I think this one was quite interesting in the sense of how the Somali community interacted with the other black community, because of the fact that for many years, especially in this country, Somali, not all, but a lot of Somalis never used to say that they were black or identify as black. Now, from one side, I think some of that may come from anti-blackness and the way that we identify ourselves. But I think on the other side, that also comes from that when a lot of us came to this country, because of our features, because of the fact that, you know, we have East African features and what some would deem to be Eurocentric features compared to, let's say, West Africa or the Caribbean, a lot of those communities used to say, we're not black. You know, it wasn't until a few years where people started, like, you know, checking for Somalis or seeing them as, you know, as black people or trying to force that label on them. But when we were young, especially when I was younger, they were like, you lot ain't black. Like, they were saying that to us. We used to, like, a lot of Somalis used to get bullied by the other black communities. And I think that's where the fragmentation came on that relationship. So I think that really heavily showed when the issue of Shukri Abdi came up, because a lot of the time the Somali community seems to be one, and then it's like the black community. And then you have some people from the Somali community that label themselves as being part of the black community and are fighting that fight, but it's not vice versa because of those kind of historical kind of issues that have existed. And I think that's why a lot of black people, alongside obviously anti-blackness, struggle to label themselves as black, because they don't identify with what it means to be black in the UK context or in societal context. So I think it's difficult in that sense. But just going back to that Black Lives Matter and who it represents, I think there was a eruption of the movement saying all Black Lives Matter, like a hashtag, because of the fact that a lot of black people felt like they, you know, certain groups weren't included, such as trans black, black trans women and men and black women. So I think, there's a massive issue in whose voices are heard within that movement itself. And all of these movements have heavily been predominantly, you know, led by black women, but a lot of the attention has been on black straight men, which has caused that kind of, you know, not feeling heard and that invisibility of black women and young black people.
I think when you said something about like the Somali community and how like everyone who, like a lot of Somali people don't identify as like black, I think that is the problem, that as to why like a lot of, I guess, other black people other black people don't really like see us as black because of the anti-blackness. I think that maybe if we view ourselves as like other than black and then like just be like blatantly racist, I think that people would be like, I don't know, like, you know, they're kind of like, they don't want us in the community, like you said. So like, I think it's just more of an anti-blackness issue rather than like how people view us.
No, 100%. But I think a lot of, I think there's a massive anti-blackness issue with the Somali community, and I guess the way that they, and even in terms of colorism, but we won't deep dive into that. But I think there's a massive issue in regards to that. But I think we also need to recognise the trauma and the bullying that was inflicted on the community when they first came to this country, because it wasn't like a little, do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, they would try and like fight them. There was like, you know, they would say things about our foreheads, and they would say things about like kind of like just Somali people in general and whatever. And it wasn't until Somali, like in East Africa, became fetishized and became into the popular culture that people started rating what Somalis were on and their features and all of this kind of things, which obviously is problematic in itself. So I think that's why I say it's like I think for me is multiple issues that have caused like a rift between these different communities. And when we look at kind of like the black community, like we see a lot of like, you know, West Africans and Caribbeans kind of like they all mix up, and they you know, they have issues themselves as well. But if we look at the Somali community is like its own community, right? Like it's very much isolated in terms of integrating with the black community, and I think that has also led to like a lack of support for movements that concern the Somali community, because that there's not that relatability, and also a lot of anti-blackness has caused that kind of like we're not you know we're not feeling each other. But I
was going to say, since you both went to predominantly white schools, how do you think that's affected your mental health?
Oh, like it's just been, obviously I went to a school that had like Colston in it, so obviously like we went to like
Lord have mercy,
like the commemorations and everything. You'd have like a lot of like protesters outside of the place, and like I would be like with the whole like uniform and everything, with the hat, and like you see like a black person like shout at you being like, oh, why do you go to this school, like they don't like you here. And it'd be like straight up harassment. So I didn't know what to do in that situation. Like obviously like I'm like in like what, year 8? And it was crazy because it's like
And you kind of don't feel accepted in either communities.
You don't, because it's like, I didn't pick this school because like the school is good in terms of education. That's why my parents like chose me to go to that school. In the sense that I didn't know what to do in that situation. Obviously, like from the outside perspective, you see yourself like not like accepted, because like obviously I didn't have friends from outside of school. Like I just became friends with you guys through this, and like I don't know, it's more of a, I don't know, inside is worse. I feel like during lessons and everything, you'd see like a lot of teachers who weren't like, just like, they wouldn't accommodate to black people in general. Even the population of black students in that school was like very large, and like everyone of my friends, like it was big black group, obviously, and like it was just crazy. Like it wasn't good.
Do you think it's different from, do you think there's been a jump from high school to post-16?
No, it's still the same. Yeah, like this. I stayed at that sixth form, and it's still so like Adan, like it's so white, and it's like, it's nothing's changed. They're still racist in the sense that like the teachers who are still racist are still there, and like they don't. It's so weird because I'm part of like the leadership team, and like I spoke to the head teacher, and one of the teachers said like, oh, black coloured or something like that, or something. They said Negro music, and so the music teacher said that, and she's white, and so I was like, what the hell? Because a year 8 student told me in the toilets about like this literal teacher said the N-word basically, and I went to the principal and I was like, have you done anything about it? And she was like, oh well, this black person in the whole like academy trust was like, oh, coloured Negro isn't a bad word, so it isn't in general. And I was like, it was so weird, like it's actually so weird. And she said that in front of me and my other black friend, and I was shocked.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And I think that's the issue, is that, you know, sometimes you have these issues that arise, and then you kind of they point to one black person who has like one opinion, and they're like, oh yeah, this is the opinion on it, rather than actually listening to those that are impacted by it. And I think that goes back to this issue of like, it's not a case where we can just all be painted with one brush. So one black person doesn't represent all. And the fact that they didn't think to speak to black students, or maybe even Google it, to actually think about, you know, what is the problem of that. And I think that's what is beyond me. Like when I come across minorities or those belonging to other groups, and I don't understand what their fight is or their vibe, my thing isn't, okay, cool, like here we go again, or like these guys are like, you know, like, oh, everything's a problem kind of thing. Rather, actually, let me listen up here and hear what their side of things are and what they're going through, because I wouldn't know, because I don't belong to that identity. And actually, you know, be on their side, because what's wrong with actually, you know, making change that is good and benefits all kind of thing. So I think it's insane that that's what they went with, and that's what they said, because I think compared to when I was at school, I thought things might have got a bit better. Because of like, I assumed that it would still be bad, but I thought, you know, because like, I don't know, I was quite a hyper child and quite loud back in school.
Same.
And if I had social media, like the way a lot of kids have today, and teachers were moving the way they did back then, everyone would get it. I will be there with my camera, like posting them on TikTok. And, do you know what I'm trying to say? Putting them on blast, because, you know, I think a lot of the times when we can't come and complain to senior leadership, or we do these different things, nothing gets done, right? There's so many times where like students have been sent home because of the way their hair is, or the fact that they've got braids in, or whatever, even though that's blatantly racist. And they would say to the teacher, or like their parents will say to them, like, why are you sending my child home? And they'll be like, because it's not part of
red.
It's not part of school uniform. They stick it on social media, and I'm not saying this is the be-all end-all solution, because it really isn't. But that sensationalism and that kind of like pressure that's created from this online community that people have built has led to a lot of schools, like, you know, backing up and apologizing and doing whatever. So I thought that's why maybe that there's a little bit more of like a fear, and like them trying to like, you know, pattern things up or sort things out, rather than doing the reversal. But increasingly, talking to young people that are in school, college, university, I'm hearing things are still the same. Like, it's just a PR campaign that a lot of these places have now.
It's true. Despite, I even went to, I have never been to a predominantly white school. Like, I went to like Cotton, and people, like most people that are of different ethnicities, like you have Jamaicans, you have Nigerians, you have different ethnicities, you have Somalis a lot of the time, and I still experience like blatant racism. Like, I could have been walking into Chitta one time when I'm 15 and I'm just killing it with my friend, as you do, and my teacher goes, "You're really aggro, you know that?" So I stepped back and I was like,
"What?"
I was like, "Sorry, what?" I said, "What does that mean?" And she goes, "You're just very full on." I said, "I came into your classroom laughing. I didn't say anything to you, so I don't see the problem." And it took me a long time to really deep her words, and then that's when I kind of opened my eyes, and that's when I was like, this is a bigger issue, and that there's kids at school that are probably not even like, because I'm just laughing, I'm just having having a laugh. There's kids that are out here that are naughty because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They've been given this label, and now they've fulfilled their prophecy, and now they're just going around being naughty and stuff, and there's nothing that they can do about it because all they've done is just prove that teacher right. And what I've done now is I just took myself, I literally, I don't know if I can swear, I just and I went on the student leadership team, became house captain, and I told her, like, you can't talk to me that way, like, that's not something you can do.
That's a flex. That's a flex.
And there's a lot of times, black people shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to prove yourself. And that's why I'm like, there's like, you can never win.
And it's exhausting because, again, you can't just be a student now. Now you have to go and do politics and become a part of the leadership team.
Now I have to come and talk about Black Lives Matter.
Right? And that's motivated by your experience rather than it being a case of, like, I want to do this to help other people.
I had to, and now now obviously it's different, times have changed, but now it's motivated me to come and, obviously speak out more on young black people's mental health, because I won't lie, that did affect me at such a young age. I was only 15, and words like that could really hurt somebody. But that was just a personal experience of mine that I've had, and I haven't seen her since, so the times have been great.
As you shouldn't. As you shouldn't. And I think firstly, I think it's commendable, like, you had that strength to actually go and do like something about it, when in fact that was the burden shouldn't have been on you. And I can really relate to that because when I was in school, like I said, I was a very loud child, and I was very hyper. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And I think I went to a predominantly white school, and a lot of like the kids that were like white kind of thing, who were like misbehaving or whatever. Their misbehaving was kind of different. It was a different energy. No, it wasn't rowdy. It was violent. Like, do you know what I'm trying to say? These men would get into like fights, and they would do like certain things. Whereas for me, I would just be a bit loud, a bit chatty patty. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And I think the way that there was a differential treatment in that was the fact that a lot of these kids, because I won't lie to you, some of these kids that were misbehaving were also very smart. They were getting good grades and whatnot. And so I would say I was getting decent grades or whatever. But the way that they would treat them was like, okay, cool, we need to work on these kids and like let them know, like, yo, like, you need to like fix up kind of thing. Like, they were, trying to support them. Whereas with me, it was like, you ain't going anywhere. You're not going to go to university. You're not going to, like, do you know what I'm trying to say? To the point where they would tell my friends who were like white, stop hanging around with her. She's not going to get anywhere in life, kind of thing. And there was a time where, like, I went to my head of house, like office kind of thing, and I was like, oh yeah, my tutor is just on my neck trying to tell me I remember I was just like, oh, he's trying to tell me I was chewing gum, and I wasn't, and he said I was giving him attitude, but I genuinely, at that time I wasn't chewing gum, and he sent me out of the class, thinking, okay, this teacher, we're going to have a little conversation about it. This guy turned around, and he came from another school, which was predominantly Somali, and he said, you know what, I understand where he's coming from, because, the Somali community are quite aggressive, and, like, you guys are really angry, so it makes sense.
Oh my God.
I said, okay. Okay.
That's how it's going to be.
And I think that's the thing. And I think for me, I'm delusional and I'm very stubborn. Like, all these different labels that were put on me, I never believed them. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I just thought like everyone else was mad because like I was living in my own world. But I know for a lot of kids, that those labels were something that they would believe. Like, when they're being told that you're dumb or you're not this or you're not that, because you don't fit into this, what an ideal student would be. And we hear this term in sociology as well, this whole thing about being an ideal student, which is somebody who's very quiet, very like down to like, reading their things or whatever, but it's also white.
A white middle-class girl.
A white middle-class girl kind of thing. And I think for me, like, going through the system of college and university was where I did my best in, kind of thing. It made me realise that I don't, like, I wasn't the issue. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, and I think that's what I try and kind of, when I'm, consulting on in regards to race, or when I'm kind of mentoring young kids, I'm telling them, yo, like, you being loud or you being hyper isn't an issue. Let's channel that somewhere where that's going to get you somewhere further, right? And that's how teachers should be. They should be like, oh my God, there's these kids in class who are confident, or like they have this energy in them. Let's get them to a place where, they're going to actually use it for something good. And we see that actually works and gets young kids into better places because they're being supported rather than labelled and told that they're not going to get anywhere or they're not going to be good or that they're aggressive or all these different things that come from racist notions of what we believe young kids to be.
So do you have anything to say to like wrap up?
Yeah, we spoke a lot about the solutions that I think are needed in regards to mental health and for young black people. But I think from young black people themselves, especially those that are, I guess, young women, Muslim and black, what do you guys think are solutions to mental health provisions for young black people? Or what more needs to be done, shall we say, rather than solutions?
I'd say like utilising social media. I think maybe like just like giving awareness and like how you said like the whole sensationalizing it and like I guess putting people on blast, but not in that sense.
I think challenging people and putting things up for discussion,
holding them accountable.
Yeah, holding people accountable and challenging. Yeah, and
but
putting things up for discussion.
Yeah, but in a, like a healthy way instead of like the cancel culture is like it's like really unhealthy and like can like really like push someone like mentally. So I think that using social media in like the best way possible.
Absolutely. Anything else?
Yeah, and obviously on top of social media, putting things up for discussion or maybe even debating about things like this because they do need to be spoken about.
Yeah.
Like they need to be spoken about regardless. So yeah, I think that would be a good take from... That's a good standpoint, basically.
Yeah,
That's a great viewpoint to go about things. And to the people watching, what's the one thing that you want them to take away from this discussion?
I would say that we need to start taking young black people's mental health more seriously and having frank conversations about what real, authentic support looks like, and that sometimes is radical. So, yeah, start reading.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nasra.
It's been lovely to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.